Oh boy. Hello, hello, hello. So, what do we think of Sunday mornings? I don't know. Sunday morning is almost over. I feel like there's a tendency to want to be productive. I guess there's a tendency to reflect. I don't think we're gonna make this even a minute. We're gonna try to make this a minute run. So today, going to do some meal planning. Going to do my goal. I've got some weight loss goals now. That's the thing. People do that. It's interesting because like one of the things, obviously, to tie it back together is that like, so if you're a static type, then you're not going to lose a lot of weight, right? You're not going to gain a lot of weight either, presumably. Hopefully, that's the hope. I mean, for someone like me, people don't have to worry. It's here's an interesting question. Do you guys have to worry about weight? Like for me, I mean, obviously, I'll be honest with you. It's always been an issue for me, right? There's a tendency. I am like perpetually hungry. Like I'm not even like being sort of a like metaphorical or b sort of like exaggerating. I really am. Like I feel like I would be the type of person to eat all day. Like I'm not even kidding. That's interesting. Is that interesting? Like it obviously like I feel like we can joke about it because I think it's kind of funny. I don't know. This is what type of humor is this? I don't know. That's another thing. It's like what type of humor? But I feel like we can joke about like the idea of like, oh, you're always hungry. I really am. Like some people like I suppose are not hungry. Like there's like appetite suppressants I guess you can buy. Maybe I should I get some appetite suppressants? That would be probably some good use of my money, right? Maybe the makeover. I'm gonna do a glow up. I'm doing a glow up. It's funny because I don't consider it like I think if I had to, I was actually writing about this guy, like this idea of like overconfidence. It's very interesting, but I feel like for me, and there was actually I was reading this it's obviously like satire or whatever, but there was this post about like sort of overconfidence, and I guess like obviously like my initial reaction, like I could relate to what the post was talking about at all, right? It was talking about like sort of leaders being overconfident. There's a big one of the things that I think people like to focus on is this idea of like competence, right? And there's this idea that you just sort of one of the things, if you're going into sort of like politics or you're going into anything, right? The idea is, are you competent, right? And so certainly it's sort of like there's a sort of standard to do a job, and then sort of like, do you meet that standard, right? It's like it's very interesting, but I think for me, like I don't, because I don't really view things like I just don't. That's not something that I can relate to. Like judging people on their confidence level. Like I think if they're good or bad. Like I used to. I don't know if I've talked about this, but I used to. I like ASMR videos. Do you guys like ASMR videos? The sort of thing about ASMR is like you whisper, right? And in other words, but I don't think not everybody whispers with ASMR though. It's actually sort of like they have the techniques, right? Anyway, there was a bad ASMR artist, or what I would consider a bad ASMR artist, and it was very interesting because like there would be a time where I would say like she was incompetent at what she did, right? At the same time, it's like it's interesting because like people get angry about that, or seemingly. I think it's all jest, but I think people like sort of get angry about that, and it's like I don't know. For me, it's like that doesn't cross my mind. In other words, that's kind of weird. I feel like if I wonder. See, my thoughts are like I wonder if I were like sort of perfectly in shape. If I like was like really like a go getter, would I have? I mean, in other words, like if it's sort of like I feel like what happens is that like there's sort of like, well, I'm putting in all of this effort to be sort of amazing, right? And what are you doing? You're just complaining, you know, or it's sort of like you want to try to get away, but you don't sort of do it. To be honest with you, and I guess like I feel like I'm like Pete Campbell, from Mad Men. I love Mad Men, by the way. That's the FYI. But it's interesting because there's like Pete Campbell from Mad Men is he seemed to really have a problem. Like, but I wonder because I don't consider Pete Campbell like incompetent, right? Well, I guess I just think because he really I think he's secretly, at least like sort of season one. I'm rewatching the show, by the way. I watched the show during like it's like when it was on TV, and then I'm rewatching it because this is what I do with my time. But I'm just kidding. But it's funny because this is, I feel like what happens too is like, I don't know. There's a lot. There are things that like bother me, but what I'm trying to say is that like I feel like deep down Pete Campbell resented, like he obviously didn't like Kevin, or what was the guy's name? Not Kevin. Ken. It was Ken versus Kevin. Anyway, so he didn't like Kevin. He didn't like Ken. Dude, love Kevin. Kevins are cool. No, he didn't like Ken Cosgrove because but it was different because I think Ken Cosgrove really he tried. Like he just was like kind of a doormat. Let people walk over. But I think he didn't like Don Draper. I mean, I think he didn't dislike Don Draper, but I think there was sort of a little bit of resentment because I think he secretly thought Don Draper was incompetent, right? And I think he was like, as we watched the show about Don Draper, the first thing we notice is that Pete Campbell's sort of sentiment of being realistic with Don Draper, and that the fact that like you're really not that good. And I think that there's sort of, I think for Pete Campbell we see others. I think the Roger Sterling Don Draper dynamic is interesting. The Burt Cooper Don Draper dynamic is interesting, right? The Peggy Olson, is that her name? Peggy Olson? That's interesting. The Peggy Olson, there's a lot of interesting dynamics with Don Draper, but I think the first one that sort of was like, I mean, right in your face, there was sort of a competition, but there was also sort of this idea that like Pete was resentful in general, right? And I think to me, like I'll admit that. I mean, if I can get on my chair here, I think resentment is a form of weakness in my opinion, right? And I think obviously a character like Pete Campbell, you know, sort of the idea of the preppy boy, but not a lot of backbone, really, right? But I think it's fun, and I think it's ironic because I would consider one of Pete Campbell to be one of the most talented people. Besides, I mean, if you're looking at the associates, honestly, I think he's more talented. In my opinion, has more sort of pure. He has better people skills than Ken Cosgrove because Ken Cosgrove's answer to people is just to let them walk all over him, right? And while I suppose, like, in other words, the question is like, who has more ambition, Harry Crane or Pete Campbell? Why are we talking about this? Is just we're getting to 10 now. Now I'm sort of in a group. Anyway, so who has more ambition, Pete Campbell or Harry Crane? I would argue it's kind of even. I think Harry Crane has a different style than Pete Campbell. I think Pete Campbell represents sort of the idea of like watching things slip away from him. And I mean, I can relate to Pete Campbell. Where there's an article titled like, and this comes to mind. The sort of memories come to mind. There's an article titled "We're All Pete Campbell." I could relate to Pete Campbell. Probably more like who do I relate to more, Don Draper or Pete Campbell? If I'm being honest, neither of them really, but I think I can relate to sort of the mantra of sort of this quest, this sort of fragile manhood. I think is what I would say. That's interesting. And Pete Campbell, obviously. Um, what was I talking about before Pete Campbell? Um, no, oh yeah, because competence, right? So this idea of like competence, right? And where was I going with that though? What was I trying to say? So I saw the post and it was like confidence. Oh, competence versus confidence and sort of how the two are related. I think the two are related, right? So in other words, your competence and your confidence, competence, PE, and your confidence, CONFIDENCE. Um, this is your spelling lesson. Why am I? It's funny. I'm in a good mood as I'm talking this. No, but, oh boy. If I am posting this, I'm posting this. I'm obviously posting this. Um, so in other words, this is interesting, right? Because yeah, yeah. So in other words, so what's the difference between in other words, how are the two related, right? Confidence and competence. And the issue is that like people who are leaders have like high confidence, but not necessarily high competence, right? and I would, to me, like, I don't really see that. Like, I don't observe that. And I think what's interesting is that, like, I suppose, like, for me, like, I don't question that. Like, it's not in my nature to sort of question it. Like, I don't question, like, you talk about, like, anybody, whether it's I mean, whether it's the current president or the past president, the previous president, or three presidents ago, right? Or four presidents ago, right? Or five presidents ago, right? Any of them, right? You know, there's a sort of recognition that there's a sort of, you got to do what it takes, right? And so the idea of, are you good at your job, is necessarily must incorporate the idea of, you did what it takes to get there, whatever that takes. Being born. I'm just kidding. But I think that was a joke. That was a joke where I'm a little more, like, sort of iffy, if I can say that. Anyway, the point is that not everybody's born. Because people die. I'm just kidding. No, but it is interesting, and it's sort of like, why did I talk about that? I guess because I feel like I can relate to the idea of, like, I think I have a sort of natural confidence, and I think, it's funny because I think someone like Pete Campbell, right? We talk about him. And like I said, I haven't really, this is me just, like, flying off the cuff. I always fly off the cuff, maybe too much. But we talk about him, and it's interesting because, like, I feel like I don't think he suffered from a lack of confidence. Right. I think he suffered from, I mean, I think he suffered from a lack of confidence in terms of, but I think people like him, and maybe people like me, and sort of the idea is, like, it's not per se the confidence issue. It's sort of the misattribution of what it does it really take to sort of demonstrate, to sort of instill confidence in others of you, right? I think that's the real issue, right? Like, I think I remember, like I said, I just watched the episode. I want to give you an example because, like I said, I can remember a specific example. Like, there's sort of this. You remember that scene? I don't know if you remember that scene. But anyway, this is just my analysis. Too. I could be way off, but I'm just giving you my thoughts. So remember that scene where Pete tries to flirt. He's returning the chip and dip, right? He got for the marriage, and he's sort of like, and there's a there's a sort of expectation that his presence at this sort of return store, which I suppose women did the shopping, etc., would garner him sort of respect, right? And he doesn't, and I think you sort of get that to where he's sort of like, I demand to be treated a certain way, like, I'm returning this thing. How dare you defy me? And it's like, he's not given the sort of respect that he thinks he deserves. And I think that aspect is not a lack of confidence; it's an overconfidence. Is interesting, right? And I think that, but I think it comes off as, well, he's being sort of the whiny sort of baby, right? I.e., I can be whiny baby. We all can be whiny babies, right? Because there's sort of this idea that the disconnect, in my opinion, is between the actualized effort that it requires to sort of, in other words, you don't expect to have to do stuff for certain people that you actually do. And I think that can be a change in sort of the guard of, oh, this is a new sort of dynamic that we're having in society, et cetera, et cetera. That's interesting. So in other words, so to tie that with the post, right? So the idea is that, like, well, to me, like, leaders, it's just so tough to sort of, like, I think one of the hesitations that I have is that, like, it's so easy to say, like, there's sort of an objective standard, but when we're talking about a position, and we're talking about situations that, in other words, like, to me, the objective standard is, did you follow the protocol that you were supposed to do, right? Like, like, people can say, like, I mean, just to give, like I said, I'm full of examples today. Not really. It's interesting because you wonder what that implies. Anyway, so you talk about, like, Bay of Pigs invasion. I have no idea what happened with the Bay of Pigs invasion, but there's sort of a decision that the president makes in the Bay of Pigs invasion, and the idea is that, well, what is the protocol for that, right? And I would argue there's not necessarily a protocol, right? So one of the difficulties with sort of judging leaders, with sort of judging these positions, is that it's easy to sort of say, in other words, like if you're in a very low stakes position, which is presumably not the position that people complain about, because in other words, there's sort of not much. But the high, if you're in a low stakes position, there's a protocol, and the question is literally, did you follow the protocol, right? And if you followed the protocol for your position, then you did well. Now, if you didn't show initiative, right? So there's a sort of unwritten rule that you have to follow the protocol, but also show initiative, and that's how you sort of advance, right? And so in some instances, you can say, well, you followed the protocol, but you're still incompetent because of that, right? But the point is that when you get into sort of higher positions, I would argue that it's much more difficult to sort of sort of judge someone on the basis of a non-existent protocol, especially for novel situations. So I say, and I would argue, and this is what I think we tend to do with sort of leaders, right? Is that because there's the lack of a protocol, what you end up judging them on is their initiative, right? So the best presidents in history, the sort of best leaders in history, are the ones who sort of invaded, right, or sort of did something, right? And you can talk about how, like, maybe sort of we talk about the Bay of Pigs. I think I have no idea what happened. I'm so bad at history, but I think there was sort of he almost got into a war with Cuba or something. It was like he didn't, and it was sort of like he was on the fence. So I think, in other words, we can sort of say, to me though, I think the initiative, right? Like I think if you look at the presidents that didn't do anything or didn't sort of show initiative. Now, obviously, a lot of that may be without their control, but I think if you're sort of a chicken leader, then I think that's worse. So I think, but once again, there's no protocol, so you can sort of overshoot that and not shoot that, so it's tough to do. This is 17 minutes. This is weird, but this is my 511 thoughts for a Sunday, some random Sunday, right? We didn't go in order anymore, but hi, I'm still making these videos. The only person, a person really made these videos. We got you. I have a good one. Bye.